What if I told you that a tiny 10-cent coin sitting unnoticed in a dusty change pile could be far more interesting than it looks? Most people see an old Roosevelt dime, notice the scratches, dirt, discoloration, or worn-out surface, and toss it right back into circulation without giving it a second thought. But collectors know something different. The ugly, forgotten, beat-up coins can sometimes deserve a much closer look. And today, we're counting down 3 Roosevelt dimes that could make you stop before spending your next 10 cents. We're talking about coins that have survived decades of circulation, coins that may have been dragged through mud, dropped on sidewalks, forgotten in drawers, or pulled from dusty change piles. And yet certain varieties, errors, unusual conditions, or high-grade examples can attract serious attention from collectors. One of these dates may look completely ordinary at first glance, but the right combination of rarity and condition can send its price going vertical. So before you spend another Roosevelt dime, watch until the end, because I'm showing you exactly what to look for. And here's where this gets even more interesting. Not every old dime is valuable, and simply being old or dirty does not automatically make a coin worth hundreds or thousands. The real story is hidden in the details, condition, minting characteristics, errors, varieties, and collector demand. A coin that looks like trash to one person can become a fascinating discovery to another, especially when it turns out to be an unusually well-preserved mint-state example or a scarce variety that collectors are fighting over. Some remarkable Roosevelt dimes have brought strong prices at auction, proving that 10 cents on the face can sometimes represent much more to the right collector. So keep your eyes open, because we're going straight into the first coin, and I want you to look at your own change pile differently after you see what makes this particular Roosevelt dime worth checking. This is a 1983 Roosevelt dime, and it looks ordinary, worn, and almost completely forgettable. But I need you to stop before you throw one back into your change pile, because this is exactly the kind of coin that can pass through thousands of hands without anyone realizing what they are holding. The 1983 Roosevelt dime was made for everyday American commerce, and millions entered circulation. That means most examples you find will not make you rich. But here's the twist. When collectors examine these coins, they aren't simply looking at the date. They're looking at condition, mint mark, striking quality, errors, and those tiny details that can separate an ordinary 10-cent piece from a collectible example. Imagine finding one after it has been dragged through years of circulation, covered in scratches and dirt, looking like trash, and then discovering that its condition or unusual characteristics deserve a much closer examination. That's why you should never judge this dime simply by its face value. Now think about what happened to these coins after they left the U.S. Mint. They went into cash registers, pockets, vending machines, bank rolls, dusty drawers, and change jars. Some were dropped on concrete. Some were exposed to moisture. Some may have spent decades buried underneath other coins. Others were probably forgotten for 30, 40, or even more years before somebody finally found them again. And that long journey is exactly why condition matters so much. A heavily circulated 1983 dime can show scratches, contact marks, worn details, and dull surfaces. But an example that somehow escaped all of that abuse can be dramatically more interesting to collectors. When a coin remains close to its original mint state appearance, especially with strong details, attractive surfaces, and minimal damage, the price can rise far beyond what you expect from a 10-cent coin. This is where the story changes from ordinary pocket change to serious coin collecting. And here's the part that could make your next change checking session much more interesting. You need to inspect the coin instead of simply looking at the date. Start with the mint mark, then examine Roosevelt's portrait and the lettering around the coin. Look carefully at the rim and the edge. Search for unusual doubling, strange shapes, missing details, abnormal metal appearance, or other signs that the coin may have something different going on. Don't assume every scratch is an error, because circulation damage happens to millions of coins. But genuine mint-made errors and varieties can be much more desirable. The goal is not to convince yourself that every 1983 dime is rare. The goal is to know what deserves a second look. That's the difference between casually spending a dime and actually hunting for valuable coins. Now let's talk about condition, because this is where the price can change dramatically. Picture two 1983 Roosevelt dimes sitting next to each other. One has been through circulation for years. It's scratched, dull, worn, and looks like something you would never think twice about. The other has sharp details, clean surfaces, strong luster, and an appearance that suggests it spent much of its life protected from circulation. They may have the exact same date, but collectors can view them very differently. A high-grade, mint state coin can attract substantially more attention than a heavily worn example. And this is why collectors inspect coins under good lighting and sometimes use professional grading services. A coin that looks merely old, to the naked eye, may reveal much more when its surfaces and preservation are examined carefully. And don't make the mistake of thinking that dirt automatically creates value. A dirty coin is not necessarily a rare coin. In fact, cleaning or harshly scrubbing a potentially collectible dime can actually hurt its desirability. So if you find an old 1983 Roosevelt dime, resist the temptation to polish it until it shines. Leave the surface alone and examine it as you found it. Collectors want to know what happened to the coin naturally, not what happened to it after someone attacked it with chemicals or abrasive materials. This is especially important if you believe you found an unusual error or a high-grade specimen. The ugly, forgotten coins in dusty change piles deserve attention, but they also deserve careful handling. Sometimes the smartest thing you can do is simply put the coin aside and investigate it before doing anything to it. Now here's the auction angle that makes this hobby so exciting. Valuable Roosevelt dimes do exist, and exceptional examples can bring prices far above face value when rarity, condition, and collector demand come together. But the biggest numbers you hear about online usually belong to exceptional coins, not every example of the same date. That's a crucial distinction. Your ordinary circulated 1983 dime may be worth only a small amount over face value, or perhaps just its face value, but a coin with an unusual minting error, a scarce variety, or exceptional preservation can enter a completely different category. That's why serious collectors don't stop at, "It's a 1983. They ask, what mint mark does it have? What condition is it in? Is there a genuine error? Has it been professionally authenticated? Has an example with similar characteristics sold at auction?" Those questions can turn a simple 10-cent coin into a fascinating treasure hunt. So before you throw that 1983 Roosevelt dime back into circulation, give it one final inspection. Check the date. Check the mint mark. Study the lettering. Examine Roosevelt's portrait. Look at the rim and edge. Search for genuine mint-made abnormalities. And pay close attention to the overall condition. Remember, millions of these dimes were produced, so the date alone does not make your coin a fortune. The real excitement comes from discovering something unusual hiding inside an otherwise ordinary coin. It could be sitting in a dusty jar, buried beneath years of pocket change, or forgotten in an old drawer right now. And that's why this little dime deserves a second look. Because in coin collecting, the most exciting discovery isn't always a coin that looks valuable. It could be the one that looks completely ordinary until you know exactly what you're looking for. And if you think this 1983 dime was interesting, wait until we move to the next Roosevelt dime, because its story is another detail you absolutely don't want to overlook. Now we move to the 1997 Roosevelt dime, and this is where you need to slow down, because a coin from the 1990s can look far too modern to be worth anything special. Most people see 1997 and immediately think, that's not old enough. But that's exactly the kind of thinking that can make you overlook something interesting. This dime has been sitting in American commerce for decades, passing from pocket to pocket, through cash registers, vending machines, dusty drawers, and forgotten change jars. Some examples have been dragged through years of circulation, and now look scratched, dark, dirty, and almost worthless. But collectors don't judge a coin simply by how old it looks. They look for condition, mint mark, striking characteristics, varieties, and genuine mint-made errors. So if you have a 1997 Roosevelt dime hiding in your loose change, don't throw it away just because it looks ordinary. Stop, turn it over, and take a closer look, because the real question isn't simply what year is printed on it. The question is, what exactly happened to this particular coin? Think about the journey of a dime that left the U.S. Mint in 1997. It could have been placed into someone's pocket on day one, spent at a store, dropped onto a parking lot, collected by a cashier, and sent right back into circulation. It may have traveled across different states, spent years inside vending machines, or disappeared into a dusty jar before being discovered decades later. That's a lot of opportunity for a coin to become damaged. Scratches, contact marks, worn surfaces, discoloration, and loss of original luster can all reduce collector appeal. But occasionally, a coin survives in remarkable condition, a piece that escapes circulation and remains close to its original mint state appearance can become much more interesting. This is why two coins with the exact same date can have completely different collector value. One may be ordinary pocket change, while another, because of exceptional preservation or a recognized error, could attract serious attention. Now here's what I want you to inspect. Start with the date, then check the mint mark carefully. Don't rush. Look at the spaces around the lettering and examine Roosevelt's portrait under good lighting. Pay attention to the details of the lettering, the rim, the edge, and the overall strike. You're looking for something genuinely unusual, not just a scratch caused by decades of circulation. This distinction is incredibly important. A coin can have strange-looking marks simply because it was damaged after leaving the mint. Those marks usually don't create the kind of premium collectors chase. But when something unusual appears to be part of the original minting process, that's when the investigation becomes much more interesting. So don't automatically call every double-looking letter an error, and don't assume every damaged rim is rare. The goal is to identify characteristics that deserve professional examination. And then there's condition, the factor that can make the difference between an ordinary dime and a collector-grade example. Imagine finding a 1997 Roosevelt dime that looks like it has barely been touched. The surfaces are bright, the design details are sharp, and the coin still shows strong original luster. Now compare that with a dime that has spent decades being tossed around with keys, coins, and other objects. The difference can be enormous from a collector's perspective. That's why mint state examples can become so fascinating. A coin doesn't have to be ancient to be collectible, and it doesn't have to look spectacular at first glance to deserve examination. Sometimes a real treasure is a coin that somehow escaped the normal abuse of circulation. If your 1997 dime is unusually clean and sharply detailed, don't immediately assume it's ordinary just because the date isn't from the early 1900s. But here's a warning that every new collector should remember. Don't clean it. If you find a suspicious 1997 dime, resist the temptation to scrub away the dirt or polish the surface. A coin that looks dirty may simply be dirty, but cleaning can permanently alter the original surface. Collectors generally prefer coins in their natural state, and harsh cleaning can leave scratches or unnatural surfaces that reduce desirability. So the ugly, forgotten, beat-up coin sitting at the bottom of a change pile might actually deserve more respect than you think. Pick it up carefully, examine it under good light, and compare its details with reliable references. If you suspect a genuine error or unusually high grade, consider getting an expert opinion rather than trying to improve the coin yourself. Now, let's bring in the money side, because this is the moment every treasure hunter wants to hear about. Exceptional Roosevelt dimes can bring prices far beyond their 10-cent face value when the right combination of rarity, condition, and collector demand comes together. But don't fall for the idea that every 1997 dime is automatically worth hundreds or thousands. That's not how the market works. The exciting auction prices usually belong to exceptional examples, not ordinary circulated coins. If a 1997 dime has a recognized mint error, unusual variety, or truly outstanding preservation, its potential can be dramatically different from a normal circulated specimen. That's why serious collectors and expert dealers examine the tiny details. They're not simply buying the date. They're buying rarity, condition, authenticity, and the story behind the coin. One exceptional example can make collectors pay serious money, while thousands of normal examples remain worth only face value. So now it's your turn. Go through those dusty change piles. Check the old jars. Look inside drawers. Examine the coins that everyone else ignores. If you find a 1997 Roosevelt dime, check the mint mark, inspect the strike, study the lettering. Examine Roosevelt's portrait and look closely for anything genuinely unusual. Don't let a little dirt fool you, and don't let a little age convince you that you found a fortune. The key is knowing what separates an ordinary dime from an exceptional one. And that's what makes this hobby so addictive. A coin worth 10 cents can look completely insignificant until the right detail changes the entire story. Keep that in mind, because we still have one more Roosevelt dime to uncover. And the final coin takes us much further back, to an era when the composition of America's circulating dimes makes this hunt even more interesting. Now we're coming to the 1967 Roosevelt dime, and this one deserves your full attention because we're stepping back into an era when Roosevelt dimes were made from a very different composition than the modern copper-nickel dimes most people know today. The year 1967 sits in the middle of a fascinating period in U.S. coin history, when the mint was dealing with the consequences of the silver shortage and the enormous demand for circulating coins. But here's where collectors need to be careful. Simply seeing 1967 does not automatically mean you discovered a fortune. The real excitement comes from understanding what makes particular examples stand out. A 1967 Roosevelt dime can be found in circulation, dusty change piles, old collections, and forgotten drawers, and some look absolutely terrible after decades of use. Scratched, dark, worn, and dragged through years of everyday life, they can look like trash. But if you're willing to inspect the details instead of judging the coin by its appearance, you may discover something worth investigating. So before you spend or clean that old 1967 dime, stop for a moment, because this is exactly the kind of coin that can make a collector look twice. Here's a historical detail that makes this date especially interesting. The United States Mint had stopped using silver in regular Roosevelt dimes beginning in 1965, replacing the traditional silver composition with a copper-nickel-clad composition. That means the 1967 Roosevelt dime belongs to the early years of this major transition in American coinage. These coins were produced during a period when the government was trying to keep enough small-denomination coins moving through the economy, while the country was experiencing serious coin shortages. Millions upon millions were needed for everyday transactions. The result was a huge production effort, and that history is part of what makes these coins fascinating today. Your 1967 dime may have been handled by countless Americans, carried in pockets, dropped on sidewalks, placed inside cash registers, and forgotten for decades. It is not simply an old-looking dime. It is a surviving piece of an important period in U.S. mint history. Now I want you to examine your 1967 dime like a collector. Start with the date, and then study every part of the design. Look at Roosevelt's portrait, the lettering, the rim, and the overall strike. Then inspect the surfaces carefully under good lighting. You're searching for unusual characteristics that may have occurred during the minting process, not random scratches created after the coin entered circulation. This is where many people make a mistake. They find a strange mark and immediately believe they discovered a rare mint error. But circulation damage can create all kinds of strange-looking shapes. A genuine mint-made error is a different story. So look carefully. Compare the coin with normal examples, and don't let excitement replace careful examination. If something appears truly unusual, that's when an experienced dealer or professional grading service may become important. And then comes one of the biggest factors in the value equation: condition. Think about a 1967 dime that has spent nearly 60 years being pushed around in circulation. It may have scratches across the fields, flattened details, dull surfaces, and countless contact marks. It has been through the real world. Maybe it sat underneath other coins in a dusty jar. Maybe it was carried in someone's pocket for years. Maybe it was even exposed to moisture and dirt. Now imagine another 1967 dime that was protected shortly after leaving the mint and preserved in remarkably high grade. The difference can be dramatic. A high-grade mint state example can attract collectors because of its preservation and quality. That's why you should never assume that every old-looking coin is valuable, or that every clean-looking coin is ordinary. Condition is one of the first things serious collectors investigate. And please remember this. Don't clean your 1967 dime just because it looks dirty. That old, ugly surface may be telling you something about the coin's history, and aggressive cleaning can permanently damage the surface. Scrubbing, polishing, or using chemicals can leave hairlines and unnatural surfaces that collectors may dislike. So if you discover one of these coins in an old box or dusty change pile, handle it carefully and examine it naturally. The goal isn't to make the coin look new. The goal is to determine what you actually have. A coin that looks like it came out of a lake or spent decades buried somewhere may still be interesting, but dirt alone doesn't make it rare. What matters is a combination of date, composition, minting characteristics, condition, and collector demand. Now let's talk about the part that gets everyone's attention, the money. Exceptional 1967 Roosevelt dimes can command premiums when they combine desirable characteristics with strong condition and collector demand. But this is where you need to separate reality from exaggerated internet claims. A normal circulated 1967 dime isn't automatically worth hundreds or thousands just because it's old. The most impressive prices are generally associated with exceptional coins, such as high-grade specimens or coins with significant, authenticated errors or varieties. That's why auction records can be so fascinating. When a truly exceptional coin appears, collectors can compete for it, and the price can rise far beyond face value. But don't look at a headline auction price and assume your pocket change example is worth the same amount. Instead, use those sales as a clue about what serious collectors are willing to pay for the right coin. So now, before you spend your next 1967 Roosevelt dime, give it the inspection it deserves. Check the date, examine the surfaces, study Roosevelt's portrait and the lettering, look carefully at the rim and edge. Pay attention to the overall strike and search for genuine mint-made abnormalities. And most importantly, don't clean it. Remember, this little dime survived an important chapter in U.S. coin history. It was produced during the early years after the United States moved away from silver in circulating dimes, and has potentially spent decades traveling through American commerce. Most examples won't make you rich, and that's important to understand. But the right error, variety, or exceptional mint state example can make a coin dramatically more interesting to collectors.